Hey, my name's Branden DuCharme with DuCharme Wealth Management, and my unexpected hobby is playing Magic the Gathering.
Welcome to Unexpected Hobbies of Financial Advisors, the podcast where we interview fellow financial advisors about their pursuits and pastimes beyond their professional persona, some of which may be surprising to their colleagues and clients. We're interested in what makes them tick and how their unexpected hobbies might or might not relate to their everyday lives. Here's our discussion with this week's guest. Welcome to the Unexpected Hobbies of Financial Advisors podcast. I'm Brian Wright with Fiduciary CFO, and alongside me, sort of, for the first time ever, Joshua's not alongside me physically. But spiritually he is. Emotionally he is, right, Joshua?
Joshua, it's good to see the screen.
Yes, finding himself in sunny Florida today as I'm in the cold Midwest Indianapolis suburb. But glad to see you there on the screen, Joshua.
It's good to be here. Thanks for giving it a go, doing this with 3 cameras and 3 computers. We'll see how it shakes out.
We are wildly optimistic that this will be satisfactory. So joining us today is Branden with Magic the Gathering hobby. I know Magic the Gathering. I barely know anything about, I know there's a collecting piece and I know there's like a game that you play and it's sort of like, is it like a Dungeons and Dragons thing? So I have like all these little things that pop in my mind when I hear that as a hobby, but I know it's a thing, which is already better than some of the hobbies that we've talked to. So, Branden, thanks for joining us. Tell us how you got into this hobby of yours.
So I got into the hobby because my mom, in a valiant effort, tried to buy us some Pokemon cards when I was a kid. Like really, really little. Like this was in like 99 or 2000. And she brought them home. We're like, what the heck are these? Are Pokemon cards, like put them in a box somewhere. And then the next school year, my older brother was, so like I'm in kindergarten and my oldest brother is going into middle school. And so he goes to, and so we were like Pokemon kids. He goes to middle school and there's these kids playing with Magic cards. And so he came home and he's like, where are those weird Pokemon, not Pokemon cards? Mom got us. That's what kids at my new school play. And so he started playing Magic the Gathering. And, as a young kid, the one thing you want to do more than anything else is hang out with your older brother. So
sure.
I started playing Magic the Gathering, and I kind of played that alongside of like the whole, like that early 2000s era of Pokemon was like really big in the beginning, and then kind of got taken over by Yu-Gi-Oh a little bit. And then Magic was always this thing that kind of older people played more. Like I never really had friends kind of my own age that played Magic cards. It was always me playing with the older kids. So I always got absolutely wrecked. Right, I was like horrible in the early years compared to these kids with, what seemed like significantly advanced IQs compared to my own. And so anyways, I started playing Magic cards and kind of played alongside, so we played Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic the Gathering. And my older brother sort of phased out of that in high school, late high school, and kind of never really did much of it after that. My little brother, he kind of played and then didn't have much interest once we got a little bit older. And I just always liked it, enjoyed it. And then so I've just kind of continued playing. And I've gone through a couple phases where I don't play very much. And then phases where I play a lot. And I think everyone has that kind of experience with hobbies at some point, right? But here we are. It's been now like 24 years. And one of the unique things I've liked about Magic is that everywhere I've ever moved, you can sort of find your tribe, right? And it's usually like really nice, welcoming people. And so although maybe like I didn't fit the classic mold of what people would expect a Magic card player to be or look like, or, do otherwise, like they would be like, oh, you know how to play, cool, great, come play with us. So when I moved across the country after high school, I could find people. When I went to a different high school, and in high school I found people. When I joined the Army, I found people to play with, right? It's like all over the country, there's all these people. It's one of the most played games in history. So it's been a really interesting journey. And yeah, there's kind of three components to Magic the Gathering. There's like you say, like the collectible part. There is absolutely a collectible component to it. We could talk more about that. And then there's actually a lower, what they call a lower side to it, like the story component. And that is the part that I've never really paid any attention to. I don't know almost anything about the lore behind Magic the Gathering. And then there's the playing Magic the Gathering. It is a card game, right? At the end of the day, you gotta play. So I would say on the collectability side, a lot of the collectability is based upon the actual game itself and the playability of cards, and then there's some that's like around scarcity of cards, stuff that can't get reprinted. And then I would say like very little of it is tied to like a lore piece, some kind of lore or something like that. It'd be a little more obscure. But
Episode 3 of our show, we had Adam on who played chess, and he said one of the most played games in the history of humanity. And you're also saying Magic the Gathering, one of the most played games. I'm guessing the history is not as old as chess, but how far back does organized under this trademark or name? How old is this?
92 or 93.
So you got in on the ground floor then, practically back in the 90s.
Man, if it would have been a couple of years older, if I would have been a couple of years earlier, man, I would be probably retired.
Different path.
Well, I guess I sort of consider myself work option. Yeah, but it would be interesting. But also in hindsight, it's like, the people that are like, well, oh yeah, if only I'd bought, Apple as a penny stock or whatever. But it's like, would you really have held it all the way to now? Probably not. Yeah. I probably wouldn't. Yeah. I probably wouldn't have all those. I mean, there's Magic cards that from like those first couple sets that came out in the early 90s. That's where people hear about the big dollar amounts. Probably the most iconic and famous card in Magic is the Black Lotus, which is like really it's a mediocre card. I mean, it's good, but it's banned at this point, basically in most formats people play. So like, even if you have one, it's got really limited play use. And, but if you have a graded one that's in good condition, I mean, you can get, a couple $100,000 for one. It's pretty crazy, but back then people were just like opening up a lot of booster packs, somebody might have 15 or 20 of them back in the early 90s and didn't think about anything about it. And they thought, I'm bored with this game, and they threw their cards out or they gave them to their cousin or whatever. And now today in hindsight, it's like, they gave somebody the value of a house.
Yeah. So for folks that are listening that don't know like how you play this game, present company included, like I don't know how do you play this game?
Sure.
Like talk me through the mechanics.
Yeah. One of the things that I like about Magic is that you don't have to know anything about the lore or like the back history of this or that. You really can just pick up a deck, read the rule book, and start playing. It has become an increasingly insane amount of different mechanics to the game, and so you have to do a lot of read the card. It's kind of a joke at a lot of Magic card tables, like reading the card explains the card. But the idea is, it depends a little bit on the format that you play. So let me use my preferred format as an example. It's called Commander, or EDH, which stands for Elder Dragon Highlander. And it's a multiplayer format that's designed to be very social and a little bit more casual in nature. And so the way that it would work is we each have our decks. They consist in this format of 100 cards. You can have one copy of every card aside from kind of what they call a basic land, which are the components that enable you to play cards, basically. And so we would each start with 40 life points, and I have creatures and cards that deal damage. And the idea is I'm going to try to get your life to 0. And maintain that I am the last person standing. There's a very high level overview. There's a lot of things that all of a sudden gain life and trade life, and you can attack, but somebody can block. And, there's actually, there was an MIT study done on Magic the Gathering that said it's the most complex game ever made because of the somewhat infinite number of possibilities and combinations of the game.
Oh, wow. So are you like, is everyone like dealt 100 cards out of a stack, or is this like you pick 100 of your best, like your fantasy football team, and you just go into battle now with your 100 best cards in your collection?
Kind of more like that. So you have your collection of cards that you acquire through various means, and so you put together a deck that you believe is going to have good synergy. So it's not always about just saying like, there's not a way in Magic to just say like, these are the 100 best cards in the game, so I'm just going to build a deck with the 100 best cards, and now I'll just basically win. The combinations and permutations of this whole thing is so infinite. And then once you run the randomization of what cards are you going to have in sort of what order, and are they going to be important or relative at the time you have them relative to what other people at the table are sort of doing, it's impossible to basically know. And so you have to pick cards that you think, like, you have to sort of have a game plan and a strategy. But as good as that may be in, say, even 8 out of 10 games, in those other 2, there might be somebody with some one-off deck that absolutely is just built to destroy yours in every way. You know what I mean? It's like, it just, there's not a way to really get around that. So one of the reasons I like Commander is because it is even more complex than, what they call like heads up Magic, right? Like one-on-one. And it's because all of a sudden we get playing and I'm going like, man, I'm in a really tough spot. But if I could talk Brian into attacking Josh right now, then that would free up, keep me in the game, but take maybe some of the pressure off me, where Josh is going to want to kind of get some revenge on Brian. And then, maybe Brian's going to get one of the resources out of the way that I kind of need, to leave the table so I can keep playing. It's all of a sudden there's these, you got to like really understand not only your deck and what it's supposed to be doing, but how it interacts with everyone else. And then like the actual social components of what can I possibly try to do to kind of play the table here, right? And form, a temporary alliance, or, now I'm going to, go back on our truce we made earlier for whatever reason, or it's I don't know. To me, it's fun. I like that aspect of the game more so than like the lore, right? With storytelling, it's just fun.
So how many people are sitting around a table when you're doing this? How many players are there?
So Magic was originally designed for 1v1, right? And in your like very competitive, like your professional tournaments, that's how it still is. In this more social format that I play, typically it's going to be a minimum of 3 and as many as 6. I mean, there's not a limit. You can go as like, I've played in groups that had 8 or 12, but it just gets to be very unwieldy, right? Because if I kind of take my turn and then there's 11 other people that have to go, and all of a sudden I'm an hour before my next turn, it just gets a little boring. So,
whoa. So if you're playing with 4, how long is it? Like Monopoly, that it takes as long as it takes, or is there a pretty much standard? It's going to take about 90 minutes.
It takes as long as it takes. And oftentimes it's going to be dependent upon the level of competitiveness you're playing at. So I would say on average, a game of Commander like should take 45 minutes, maybe an hour.
And if there's, you mentioned when you were first starting, you're fairly terrible. If there's different people at different skill level, does that make the game last longer or go more quickly, or does it depend on the collegiality of it?
Do you handicap the more experienced ones? Like, yeah, this is fascinating.
No. So when I first started playing, they didn't have Commander. It was a totally different game back then. And in Commander, though, it is, what's cool is it can be anyone's game. So somebody can buy like a pre-constructed deck from, Walmart or their local game store and play with, like 3 other people that all have decks that cost thousands of dollars. And the guy that bought the $40 or $60 deck from Walmart off the shelf or whatever, like, can legitimately win. And it just has to do with, did he get lucky? Did other people not pay attention to him because they thought, well, he's just playing this weak deck, so I'm going to kind of try to focus on the other guys first? Did people make big errors and all of a sudden the guy comes out of nowhere, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that can happen. From a time standpoint, it typically can take a bit longer if there is somebody that's new that you have to just do a lot of explaining, and like you're trying to teach them the game, and that teaching component can obviously slow things down, right? And I think that's true for basically any hobby. But yeah, you don't handicap somebody because what's interesting is the game won't do the handicapping for you.
You mentioned reading the rule book. Is this like reading the back of a deck of Hoyle cards, or is it like the Schwab manual that's 900 pages?
For the basic rules, it's going to be, more like an insert in the box, be enough to get you going. For the full list of, like rules and then technicalities and rulings that have been done by official judges, it's more like reading case law.
Yeah.
And yep, it's going to be more like, reading terms and conditions. So there's apps though that you could put in. You can actually say like these two, you can put in like this card and this card and how do they interact, and then it can bring up different rulings from judges and explain how and why it works a certain way. So it gets very, on a competitive level, it gets very, very technical.
That sounds like a use case for AI. Is there a bot specific keyed into this is the case law, it's been fed in, it knows the questions and answers?
The information is so readily available on the internet that you probably could use Perplexity or ChatGPT for that very effectively.
You mentioned different ways of acquiring cards. There's the going to Walmart, there's the my mom bought me the wrong thing method. What are the other options that one could plausibly, aside from, inheritance, how does one acquire cards?
Yeah, there's a number of websites online that you can go. So if there's a specific card you want, you can just go buy it individually on the secondary market. You can buy kind of booster packs, which are more like the lottery tickets of Magic, right? And that's what you buy at, Walmart or this sort of thing. And I would say like those are the two primary ways people get cards. It seems like trading isn't as common as it used to be. Like when I was a kid, you'd love to get a bunch of people together playing Magic, and you would go around and try to trade, and acquire up what you needed. So maybe, like I remember as a kid, I would get something I had but didn't really care for, but I knew what I wanted, but I knew that what I had, not a lot of people wanted. And so I'd find the person that did want that, and I would actually trade for what they would call staple cards, like stuff that is more readily desired, right? It's just like more people want it. And so I would kind of convert my, obscure but valuable cards to a more liquid currency, if you will, almost, of these like staple cards. And then I could go and take those and trade those really easily for exactly what it was that I wanted to obtain. And I could do that in a Saturday morning, kind of at the game store. So trading used to be like a big piece, and it was fun. Nowadays, at least kind of what I observe more, especially amongst adults, is you end up with a couple hundred cards you don't really want. You just take them into the game store and say, what do you give me on store credit? You plop down the thing, they scan them through, it auto loads it into their inventory, they give you some store credit, and then you can, buy what you want.
So there's a place that my family goes each Tuesday afternoon. We go and paint pottery. And next door to the pottery studio is a game store. And in the window, they say Magic the Gathering. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a place where you can buy and sell cards. Is that a place where people would play as well? What all is entailed when you see a storefront that says Magic the Gathering?
Typically, when you see a small store, like a one-off store, right? Like you're not going to show up to, you can show up to Walmart or Target and buy cards. No one is ever going to show up to Walmart or Target and play. Right? But at what they call an LGS or a local game store, that is the exact place where you would go. So if I moved to a new city, my first spot that I would probably go visit and like looking to find people to play cards with would be my LGS, right? Like, so the local game store. And so you show up, it's a place that you can buy there, you can trade there, you can, trade stuff into them, you can buy stuff, but also they typically have tables set up where people can just sit down and play. And then they typically have events planned too. So like really the most iconic one would be what they call F&M or Friday Night Magic, And that's like a competitive tournament that most at local game stores will host on Friday nights. Now that goes into the whole competitive side of Magic the Gathering, which I'm not super involved with. But there's actually like a national registry people join, and you go to your local game store and play in these tournaments. They're called sanctioned events. And so the local game store has to adhere to the rules and standards and regulations of Wizards of the Coast, who makes Magic the Gathering. And then you can, acquire points and do this and that, and try to then go from that to qualifying for like Grand Prix, where you're going to go to maybe a larger metropolitan area and play in a higher level tournament. And eventually, right, that's how you kind of get into playing professional Magic, which is a whole other interesting topic. That there's people out there that are professional Magic the Gathering players. But
so if they're professional, then how are they making an income at it? Is it tournaments with entry fees, sponsorships?
Yeah, tournament winnings and
Podcasts.
sponsorships. It's like any other, just like any other. Like how does a pro golfer, paid to play golf? It's like they win tournaments and they get sponsorship dollars. So, like they can win money from winning the tournament, but the sponsorship dollars is going to come in from obviously not from Wizards of the Coast, but from all the accessory companies, right?
Monster Energy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it could be an energy drink company, absolutely. But like, the company that makes card sleeves and protectors or binders or play mats or, deck boxes or travel bags or, you know what I mean? Whatever. That's like, there's all this product sponsorship still. And I don't think pro Magic players make the kind of money that a lot of pro athletes might make. But I think it's enough that they support a living. There's certainly I think the people that make the real money in Magic are the YouTube influencers in the Magic space.
That makes sense. YouTube is the place for this sort of thing? It's not Twitch or any other stream, it's YouTube?
So there's a Michael Kitces of the Magic the Gathering world?
Yes.
It might be Michael Kitces, I don't know. But
could be. I've never met him. But I can
see him being into Magic.
I don't know. Like I'm somebody that just loves like the pure enjoyment of playing, hanging out with friends. I like the strategy. I like to strategize. I like to, look at cards and try to work, how they can, how their abilities sort of correlate to each other or complement or you work together or even potentially like don't work together, but in a very intentional way. That's the part that I really enjoy about the game. And so I don't do a lot of following like the YouTubers or keeping up on the latest meta or like, who the pro player, like I couldn't name a pro player truthfully.
Yeah. So during COVID, we taught our kids how to play euchre, which is if you're a Midwesterner, you know what euchre is. If you're not, you probably don't. Very unique, very Midwestern type game. But anyway, the game's in fast enough that we would debrief then because the kids are learning. It's like, okay, if you would have played this here, then this would have been that. And it was like this really good teaching environment. Is there any debriefing that goes on, or with Magic, there's so long of games? Like, can you just have to watch and learn that way, or are there debriefs?
It depends who you're playing with and the environment that you're playing in. So, like in the format that I sort of like to play is Commander format. It does happen. In fact, it's usually so friendly that you would actually say, "Look, don't do that. Do this." Like right in the game, you say, "Like you will." This is a better move. Just do that.
We're gonna let you undo this move and do this because this is
like
better.
That's really uncommon. That's really common, actually.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, I would say like if you're playing like the casual like that, but maybe a little bit more competitive. Typically, like once everything's kind of said and done, somebody might say, "Oh man, you should have actually done this or that," and that would have put you in a better spot. So there's kind of that immediate debrief still, It's sometimes there's like there's that after game kind of like thoughts that people share. If you're in a strictly competitive environment, like no way, right? Like if you're just like playing pro chess, like if you're playing pro chess and somebody has a tournament, you don't get up at the end after you checkmate them and say like, "Oh well, if you would have done this, this, and this, you could have beat me." Actually, you just say like, "Good game, bye."
Right.
Yeah. So Yeah, it just depends on the nature of who you're playing with. But most people that are playing Magic are proven.
And is it your custom to play with friends, with strangers, mix? What's your preferred way of doing things?
These days, I primarily play with friends. But what's interesting is like a lot of my friends are people that met by playing Magic. And so, like when I first moved to, like I live in St. George, Utah. It's a pretty small town. When I moved here, there was one local game store. There was one place to go play Magic, basically. And
Okay.
I showed up and just started playing, right? And you kind of find the people that you kind of jive with and click with. And you find people that, you rub the wrong way or they rub you the wrong way. And you kind of just be polite, but, maybe you might not play with them a lot. And then as time's evolved and stuff over the last several years, like I kind of figured out who my tribe was and who my friends were. And now typically when I tend to play, I actually just invite everyone to my office and we'll play in the conference room at night. Use my conference room table. And that's sort of how it's done. When I played in the Army, there was like someone in my platoon that mentioned that they were playing with one of the medics. And so although he wasn't a very serious Magic player, he introduced me to this medic that was a very serious Magic player. And then I got introduced to kind of the whole group of people, and those people are still my friends today too. And I don't play with them nearly as much as I wish I could, but Wizards of the Coast actually during COVID created a platform that is almost like a Zoom platform purpose built for playing Magic cards. So, you have your webcam, you kind of turn it down to show your desk, if you will, whatever your playing surface is. And then you can see whatever is what they call it, their, like their game board is, right? So you can see what cards they have out and this sort of stuff. Now, this really only works for casual because there's no mechanism to keep people from cheating, obviously, right? So it's just got to be people that are just trying to have good fun. But that's been really cool. It's really cool. So if you say like, oh, well, he's got that card, but I can't really tell what it is, you can take your mouse and actually click on the card. And Wizards of the Coast has it built in. It'll pop up the digital copy of it. And then there's the card. And then like in the column off to the side is like, there's all the rulings too. So if you have any questions about the rulings and this sort of stuff, right? It's kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it just shows up everyone's play mats sort of like in a configuration like we have right now. And it's really fun. In fact, that's what I was like looking to try to put together in the XYPN community when I made the post where you guys found me like, oh man, we got this sucker. He's going to talk about playing Magic cards on our podcast.
Yes.
I'm like, there's got to be, in my mind, I was like, there's got to be some financial plan. I can't be the only financial planner that plays Magic cards,
Yeah.
And so I was like, but sometimes it's so fun to play with people that you have something else in common, right? Like when I was in the Army, we would play and we had this play group and a couple guys were medics. I was in reconnaissance. You have like some military intelligence guys. You might have logistics. And so it's like this diverse group of people, but this commonality aside from Magic was we were all active duty in the Army. And so like what we found is we had a lot of fun playing because as the game was going, we could still be connecting on like a different level and making jokes about this other thing we also have, right? And so there was just like a more unique way to bond than just, hey, Josh is a physicist, Brian's an accountant, and I'm, a financial planner or whatever, right? And it's just like, we all have this one thing in common, but it's more fun when you have kind of like two things in common, right? Yeah. And so, because again, like I play from the social side, not from the like strictly competitive side. So I was like, man, there's got to be other financial, planners or advisors or whatever that, you get on and you play, but there is an additional commonality.
I have a follow-up on that, but before I get there, we've seen your hands. You wear a wedding ring. Is your spouse into the game playing as well, or is that something that's kept separate?
I have tried over the years, and I would say during COVID, I was close. Almost.
We need
got
another
her playing a
pandemic
little
to
bit
get
of a
her over the
watered
hump.
down version with me. Yeah, I got her playing a watered down version with me a little bit. She knows the basics. But in 2022, we had our first kid, and then now this year we had a second kid. And so I think the idea of my wife playing Magic is indefinitely tabled. But I have started running the PSYOP on my son. It turns 3 soon. And so I started him. He doesn't get screen time ever, but so I know whenever there's a screen, it's like a real treat for him. So I started playing Pokemon Go, so that he had interest in Pokemon. And now I've started buying, like booster packs of Pokemon. I'd be like, oh, let's see what Pokemon we catch, And so he's starting to like that. And then, he's got questions if I get my Magic cards out and stuff. And so I just try to talk to him about it a little bit. So we'll ease into it. I'll probably have to go back. So Pokemon, actually, they developed the Pokemon game. When that was bought by Hasbro, it was supposed to be a kind of a way for people to springboard into playing Magic. So Pokemon plays somewhat similar to Magic cards, but in like a very watered down version. And so I kind of anticipate that as my son gets a little bit older, the next couple of years here, I'll probably be tilting back into Pokemon cards for a time, so I can teach him the basic fundamentals of like, dude, your turn is your turn, my turn is my turn. You have to wait. You know what I mean? There's an order here. There's rules. There's, this is the objective, and just teach him those basics on a simpler game, and then lead into hopefully he plays Magic. I think that's every dad's dream, though, right? Is that your firstborn son does every hobby and activity you like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting.
Yeah.
So you
So
mentioned
far,
something
I
earlier.
feel like I got a really good. He's really interested in all the big ones, so keep my fingers crossed.
My wife's father got us when we were like 20, Settlers of Catan, and so we played that for a while, my wife and I, as a party of 2 before we had our daughter. And then once she was old enough, 8, 10, and 12, we introduced her to Settlers and then Cities, and it was very, very proud the first time that she beat me in fair, square, open play. Good work, child. That was great. Never do it again. But my wife was the strategist trying to get us to play us off each other. And you talked about the anti-collegial nature of the gameplay, getting one party to do your bidding against the other, which was very crafty of her, and I resent her very much for that. So, being new to the business, I've listened to a lot of industry podcasts, and one of the ones is my favorite is Biff Bites. The guy is the Boston Institute of Finance, and Jerry, who runs that, does Magic the Gathering. And one of his lessons that he did was, this is this card game. It's this fun thing that I do, but there's a collectible aspect of it. So there's the, hey, I'm going to buy and sell these cards. We're going to use Bitcoin. And so there's that tax aspect. And then when I sell my cards, there's capital gains. And I got a valuable collection, and there's insurance. How much of your financial planning work comes into play in the cards, or is it just, this is a social thing I do for fun with my social friends, never mind all that stuff?
I'm going to say it's very heavily skewed towards the latter. The reality of it is, I think in a perfect world, you would, every time you open up a booster pack, you keep selling data log, and you say, I have 15 cards and it costs $5. So here's what my cost basis per card is. And I'm sure the IRS would love that if you did that. So as you sold them and bought them, you kept track.
Yeah.
In reality, it's kind of like buying a blender. You know what I mean? It's like you buy a blender for $30, you just go sell it for, but maybe inflation came through, you sell it for 35. Did you really remember what you even sold it for? And are you really in the wrong for not reporting the $5 technical capital gain? And if you sell it for 25, you're not going to be able to write off a loss. But if you maybe sold other household items that you did get a gain, can you use the loss on other items to offset that? I don't know. I'm not a CPA, and I don't know that I want to get into that. I don't know the IRS wants to get into that, and I don't know.
There's other podcasts that cover that sort of stuff. That's not us.
So what I'd say is, if there was cards that somebody owned of sizable and significant value that you bought at a stage in life that you knew and understand what it is, you probably ought to keep some kind of record of your cost basis in that, and realize that there is some collectible tax law that could come into play. But if you're just, buying and selling as kind of a hobby thing, I tend to not to say more along the lines of like, I don't really think that's reportable unless it becomes significant.
If somebody has a valuable card, they're going to protect it. Do they use it in play, or is it the sort of thing that you keep on a shelf on the wall?
That is a really interesting question because really there's kind of a couple different schools of thoughts, and it's a kind of a controversial topic within the community. And so here's the thoughts. If I have a card that is worth $3,000, and I'm going to go play, but Joey next to me might spill his Mountain Dew. Do I really want to put the 3,000 card on the table? So then you have what's called proxies. So you might just get a card that was worthless, and you might say Tropical Island on it. You put it in a sleeve, put it in your deck, and now you draw it, you play it, and you say, "Well, I have a copy. I'm just not going to let you knuckleheads spill Mountain Dew on it." Some people say, "Well, okay, that's." People don't really like that, but they get it. I think there's some sanction rules around that, like in very high-end play. The issue becomes that there's now printers in, honestly, other countries that have gotten very good at printing what is basically counterfeit magic cards. Now, it's just like counterfeit money. You can tell if you know what you're looking at, right? But to somebody that has a totally untrained eye, it would look pretty convincing. And so I, I'm hoping Wizards of the Coast doesn't sue me for condoning this, but I'm actually in the camp of, if I have one of this $3,000 card and I want to play that and say, like in Commander, I have 18 or 20 different decks. So let's say I really need 10 copies. Well, I can go spend $30,000 is one option and get 10 copies of this card, put it in each deck. My other option is every time I'm changing, I can try to take it out of this deck and put it in this deck and keep track of all that. Well, that really bugs everyone in the table, right? Because now you got a bunch of time between games. It's a hassle. I run the risk of damaging the card, moving it all the time. And or what you can do is just buy basically a fake counterfeit card. And run that as your proxy. So it still looks like the real card. It still feels like the real card. It's not something totally different that somebody looks at the picture and say, "Well, I thought it was that," but you just Sharpied on it. Oh, Tropical Island instead. Yeah. And so for me, I like that option because I'm not cheating in the sense that I have the card. I've made the investment, but I am taking the convenience side and I'm trying to not detract from the game overall by people not knowing what I'm actually playing because, they're looking at my cards I have out and they all got Sharpie written on them for what they are supposed to be.
Yeah.
So, by putting a fake copy in.
The Sharpie cards don't have the rules and all that, you say read the card. Well, you can't read the card if it's a Sharpie card, right?
Right. And people, what is that again? They got to look it up or not. And then also, that gives away, like, from a game point standpoint, like, well, if somebody keeps asking me to read my card, that means something. You know what I mean? Are they worried about it? Are they going to try to, destroy that card now? So should I be worried about this player? Or should I, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of the game that kind of comes with that, right? Like this revealing of information from, like a poker standpoint, right? Just like in poker, you have what's in your hand, but a lot of the game is what's on your face, and so, yeah, it's interesting. So I fall into the camp again. It is a casual player. Like if you get, fake magic cards and you try to sell them or pass them off as real, it's illegal and immoral. If you're doing it for convenience and enjoyment of the game, by all means, I'm one to say I don't really care. I just want to have fun. So that's my aim.
Are there lessons that you've learned through the 25 years that you've doing this that are applicable to the day job of being a financial planner? What's the overlap in thought processes and stuff like that?
It's probably it probably plays a lot into the fundamental nature of all of it. It's very strategic. It wired my brain from a kid to be very strategic and understand, how things interact, but also question how things may interact. And, what does a probability distribution look like? Uh, Um, it's actually really fun that way from a mathematical perspective. And I think that has played and helped into what I do. Um, Certainly the organizational skills of trying to keep that many cards organized too, probably plays in a little bit, but, yeah, I think more than anything, it's a fun game that really can challenge you mentally. It's not you know, I'm not a video game person. And the reason why is I feel like video games has always come down to me as, like that quick response time and dexterity, right? So how fast can I hit the right button at the right time with the joystick, just the right amount. And, that's not what I like. Yeah. So yeah, the hand-eye coordination was not one of my strengths, not one of my skills. And so like when I play video games, not only do I get frustrated, I often does feel like this is also just like mind numbing versus intellectually engaging. And I feel like Magic is more intellectually engaging. So because it's intellectually engaging, which is interesting for me, and it doesn't require any kind of hand-eye coordination and reflective response time, it's more enjoyable for me, right? It doesn't have any I suck at, and it's got a little stuff I like.
Well, making the most of your opportunities and taking what comes. You were talking about how a game unfolds and you just don't see how things are going to happen and surprises happen. It made me think, sequence of returns risk, that you never know what the next event is going to be and how you're going to have to adapt to it.
Well, yeah, I think I learned in Magic that you can't, there's no perfect plan. You cannot have a deck that will just win every time. And the more that you try to make a deck that will work great in all situations, the lower your chances of success of actually winning. And so you have to say, in Magic, which risks am I comfortable with? Because I can identify for whatever reason that I am more willing to play around that against it, or not a lot of people play that. So in the one time that happens, I'll just lose. But if I win 8 out of 10 times otherwise, like, I just like those odds, right?
So as you've been doing this for coming up on 25 years, are there special memories that you have that were special triumphs of the game or social moments, things that you're going to look back fondly on or tell your kids about that, hey, this one time, stories like that?
I don't really think so. I think it's more of a foundation, just a foundational piece of my life more than anything. Yeah, I think more so that.
Sure.
Yeah, you talk about the social aspect of it too, playing with groups of people and people you've met that are now friends that you play with. Has there been any new business opportunity that's come from this? People that you've met that ultimately found out what you do and are now clients? Not that was the purpose of it, but just kind of as a happenstance.
Sometimes these things happen.
Yeah. People have different views on friends and business, and my sort of personal view on it is if they are truly a good friend and the expectations are right, and I'd love to do business with friends because I'd rather do business with friends and pour my energy into like helping friends and family or whatever it may be, than stranger off the street that may not appreciate it. So there's always an expectations conversation, but it's like you should be transparent with everyone anyways. And you should always be trying to set right expectations and shoot people straight. And so, I haven't minded doing business with friends and family. And I certainly have, a couple of friends that I've met playing Magic that are clients and it's not a focus. It's not why I play Magic, but
Right,
although
sure.
sequel or Brent approaches you and says, gee, I really could use your help. Well, the last thing I want to say is, well, gee, I'm not going to give it to you,
Right.
Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, then, do you have clients that, non-Magic the Gathering playing clients that know you do this? Like, is this something that you're like, hey, look what I do? You wear that on your sleeve as part of your identity?
No, and not because I'm ashamed of it. I mean, I'll talk. Hell, I'm on a public podcast talking about it.
There you go. They're gonna know now.
But probably more so because the last couple of years I haven't had as much of a chance to play with having kids. And so I've had a lot of my play professionally and then a lot of my played at home. And that's really, put the brakes on a lot of hobby stuff. So, like the last couple of years, my hobby has been,
Infants.
learning how to take care of babies and, support a wife in doing that. And, and then, taking care of a growing number of clients. And I did this last year, the CLT program, which was somewhat of a heavy lift too. So that absorbed a lot of extra time.
Sure.
So, I hope to get back to it a lot, like I haven't stopped playing, but before we had kids, man, it was like 3 nights a week, because like during COVID, I was 2-3 nights a week. It was fun. I'd like to get back there someday, but that probably won't happen until my son is old enough to come with me.
In a local community, the people that would frequent a local game store, yours, for instance, how old would be the older upper edge of people who play? Like when it came out in the 90s, if somebody was 40 and got into it and now they're pushing 70, are there a lot of those out there? Or is that not something that you see much of? Are you the senior citizen of the group?
No. I would say I'm like I'm probably median age. I'm 30, I'm almost 31. There's a couple of guys that are, pushing 70, guys in their, 50s, 40s. And that's typically the crowd that I tend to like to play with a little bit more. And then it's all the way down to like teenagers, that are still just, newcomers to the game and getting in. So one of the great things about a local game store is this is a very diverse, it's all kinds of people from all different walks of life, from all different professions, from all different age groups and socioeconomic statuses. It's, it's really interesting. I love it.
I know you're using the expression guys generically, but what is the gender balance in the crew? Or it probably varies from store to store. I would guess it skews male, but not exclusively.
It absolutely skews male, and I think it depends on geographic area. So, like when I was in the Army, it definitely was like 98
Selection bias, yeah.
Because there's not a lot of like women in the Army to begin with, right? I would say like the local game store here, if you have maybe 40 people there on a Friday night, you probably have maybe 4 to 6, 7 females, maybe. But then, like in Washington State, I would say it was closer to maybe a 70-30s balance.
Sure.
So,
thinking
definitely skewed.
Well, for sure.
But nothing is keeping it that way, and women are very much welcome if they choose to. In fact, I think sometimes women, it would be preferred if there is more women that were playing. So,
stands to reason. If you could go back and talk to yourself as a kindergartner or middle school or high school, what words of wisdom would you share with yourself, that things you wish you knew then that you've known now, aside from, hey, this card's going to turn into a fortune? What words of wisdom would you, other than the obvious?
Marty McFly with the Magic Card Almanac.
Yeah. Excluding that, what words of wisdom would you have for yourself going back?
I think if anything, I'd go back and tell myself, like, dude, don't spend so much money on booster packs and just buy the cards in one. Like, this is like, but that's more akin to like telling somebody like, hey man, just you go back in time. It's like, tell yourself to buy less scratch off ticket to the gas station and just spend more time playing, blackjack at an actual casino or something. Like, you have a better chance of winning. It's like, these are really, is that really the advice you want to go back in time and give yourself? I
Right.
don't.
Well, we'll flip this question around then. If you are trying to get your kids into it, how heavy a hand are you going to take molding their minds, or are you going to let them figure it out for themselves, or what's the blend there, do you think?
Uh, I think I want to use it as a tool to help him learn how to think, and my daughter too, if she plays, which I would love. I think it's a tool to learn how to think, not what.
Okay.
And that's what I want to see them get out of the game. And so I I think I just want to make it engaging enough that they start thinking. You know, like I just want them to think like, well, if I put this deck together, I could beat dad's deck. You know, like I just want to see that, right? Where like, oh, this was, maybe this would be dad's deck if he plays this one, but if he plays this other one, and my sister plays that, or whatever. It's like I just want to see those strategy wheels, turning in their head. And so I don't really want to guide the process much beyond that. Uh, just what I don't want to do is enable them to just, go online and say, what's the best performing deck in the current meta, copy it on someone else's deck list and just go play it. Right.
If somebody is a financial advisor, doesn't have an older brother, doesn't have a parent that's going to help them get into it, how would they go about finding more about the world of Magic cards, Magic the Gathering? Is it as easy as going into the local game store or the YouTube channels? Where do you start?
Yeah, any of the above. Magic the Gathering has an app now called Magic the Gathering Arena. I believe it's largely a free app. You can learn it. You just get a lot of exposure to maybe how the game works a little bit. Maybe a very basic, not super social, kind of experience. But, it's like a easy, not threatening way to dip your toes, maybe. I would encourage people to go to their local game store and just say, hey, like if they heard this podcast and they're thinking like, I don't know, that's kind of interesting stuff. Maybe I want to check it out more. Just go in and say like, hey, I just heard about this guy like playing Magic on a podcast, and he said he played Commander, and I'd like to know more about that. Like, is there a night that do you guys have a Commander night here at the game store? And, what's the sort of barrier to entry? And is there, a group of people here? Like, here's the thing is the owners at a local game store will always basically know who the base customers are. Right. It's kind of like the bar owner always knows like the local community. It's like, and they know what people drink and how early they are and what their, whatever their sort of personalities are. Game store owners are very much the same way. So if you go in and ask if you get the guy that works at a local game store, like, hey, look, I want to learn how to play. Like, is there a group that's very welcoming? They'll introduce you right there to, whoever they think, or they'll say, yeah, come back on Wednesday night or whatever. And we'll, introduce you to some people that are really, welcoming and would be excited to, teach you how to play or whatever.
Like a coordinator.
Yeah. Well,
So-
it's in their best interest to get more people to buy, play the game, right? And you get one more guy hooked. It's like another, lifetime customer here. You got to keep going back and buying product from them.
So I imagine with the success of Magic the Gathering being around as long as it has been, probably spawned other fantasy strategy sort of card games. I mean, is that industry really boomed, and is there an oversaturation? Is this still kind of the big gorilla in the room, which is what you'd learn first, or are there other? Is this a gateway drug to another game, or vice versa?
I think it's still the main. I think it's still the main trading card game. There's some other interesting ones that have kind of spun off of Magic. And there seems to be, there's always one new one that kind of doesn't really last. There's maybe two or three other that maybe have stuck a little bit further, but still don't have a ton of traction. So Magic continues to be the kind of, the main, gorilla in the room. But WotC or Wizards of the Coast is, they got bought by Hasbro. It's just publicly traded, and they have this thing of seeking too much shareholder value, I think. And it can be disruptive to the game and the community in a pretty big way. In fact, I heard, I think it was, it's the Streetwise podcast. What's that guy's name? Jack Howe. Yeah, maybe like a year and a half ago, he actually had an episode on how Hasbro was making, like, printing so many new cards and doing so many new things, and the community was not responding well to it. So there comes a point where, from a publicly traded company perspective, it's an interesting dynamic that you have to balance with, people who want to play the game but not be bombarded with, it's going to suck all of my income to keep up, which in reality, like when you play casual like me, it doesn't have to. It's just a social pressure people might feel. And those people tend to be in the younger demographic, that they think they have to buy everything. But either way.
When you were talking about Wizard of the Coast originally, the governing body, I just sort of naively assumed that it was a collective of volunteers keeping order in your world. I did not realize that there was some middle manager guy at Hasbro in Manhattan keeping order for.
Yeah, I think it's actually out of Seattle. I think Wizards of the Coast is out of Seattle. And the game was originally developed by Richard Garfin, who is he was one of the guys that developed Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is a WotC company as well. That's a Wizards. Okay. And so that's why sometimes like the name of cards or the creature types or this sort of thing, there's this kind of natural high correlation assimilation type thing in the public's mind between Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons.
That's why. Okay.
But they are quite different. Right. You can't play Dungeons and Dragons, which I've never played, but from what I understand, you can't play without getting into like the storyline of it. That's the whole point, right?
It's narrative. Yes.
It's a narrative game. In Magic the Gathering, you can just say, I just like math. I play this game from a purely math perspective, which is kind of the approach I take. Nothing against Dungeons and Dragons, like different strokes for different folks. Sure. And, if you're a narrative person that, like likes to talk about, orcs and wizards and fairies and all this stuff, like that, it's probably a really fun thing for you to do to play Dungeons and Dragons. It could also be a really fun thing for you to play Magic. But if you don't like those things at all, but you do like math, you could still have a very fun time playing Magic.
Well, hopefully you'll find more advisors that play Magic the Gathering, and hopefully somebody out there knows somebody that's an advisor that does Dungeons and Dragons, so we can get them on the show and give some equal airtime and get another take on Wizards of the Coast and what they're up to.
I promise there is an advisor out there that plays Dungeons and Dragons.
JD Bruce does. I saw JD reached out to you to invite you to the Discord on that post. I was going to tell you when we met, it's like, hey, you should reach out to JD. Because I know he's a big gamer. He's big into D&D, and he has. I know, like he'll when he goes around to conferences and stuff, he'll do a meetup for D&D parties. I need to have. He's like a consultant now. He's not like the owner of the firm. I guess it's our podcast. We make the rules, but I was like, is he still a financial advisor? Yeah, sort of. We should have him on talk Dungeons and Dragons. He's a good storyteller. Shocker, right?
Sooner the better.
Yeah. The Dungeon Masters usually are pretty good storytellers.
Yeah.
So. Well, we appreciate having you on here. Before we wrap up completely, if people are in Southern Utah and want to know more about the work that you do professionally, how do they go about finding your firm and your day job?
DuCharmeWealth.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. I have a podcast about wealth management related topics on Spotify. Also posted to YouTube. If you want to do no due diligence whatsoever, just schedule some time with me. If you go to Branden DuCharme.com, it'll take you right to my schedule. But I tend to not. Send me an email or something and let me know why you put it on.
Give me a heads up.
But yeah, I'm not a super hard guy to find, especially like if you're in St. George. It's not a huge community. I mean, I'm right downtown. I used to be on the board for the local chamber of commerce, so I'm around.
Find you at the local gaming shop, if nothing else.
A couple of years ago, they would have.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, now they'll find you
at the
Babies R Us.
Yeah. But if there's somebody listening to this that plays Magic and you want to play it, I am trying to get a group of people put together to play via webcam. So
here you go.
Send me a message.
All right. Sounds good. We appreciate having you on.
Yeah, Brandon, this is really, really interesting. Again, as I said at the beginning, I didn't know a whole lot about it. I know a whole lot about this now. Like my brother-in-law plays. I guess he's played his whole life, and I I may tell him to bring a couple decks next time he comes down, and like, all right, let's see what this is all about. My wife, the CPA, loves math. Again, shocker. So
Yeah.
I don't know. She may dig on this. Like she loves Yahtzee. Like if it's a math game, it's like, God, that's a terrible game. But she may
Once
dig
you
it.
once you get past the idea of it being like a fantasy type game or some of the basic rules, you really start to learn that it's a math and strategy game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good.
So-
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Josh.
Appreciate it.
Unexpected Hobbies of Financial Advisors is brought to you by Fiduciary CFO, forward-thinking tax and planning solutions for business owners, like RIA firms and their business owner clientele. The opinions of Brian, Joshua, and their guests are for entertainment purposes and should not be construed as legal, tax, financial, or investment advice. You should know better than to take any of this content seriously. Thanks for being a fan of the show. If you were listening and thought to yourself, hey, I know somebody they need to have on the show, you can do something about that. Go to unexpectedhobbies.com/nominate and tell us who they are and what they do that's so interesting and unexpected. If we agree, we'll send them an invitation and we'll hope they say yes. Now it's unexpectedhobbies.com/nominate.